with these two. We're going to start off with the number 1 top seed OL Reign versus number 4 Washington Spirit. Game is going to be kicking off at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network and Twitch for international viewers. Let's recap a little bit before we get into our picks, previews of this, Lisa. There was some stadium logistics drama that came into place ahead of the semifinals actually getting, finalized and getting a little bit more clarity. Maybe, let's say, leading up into that final group match week, there was some concerns about where the possibility of the top seeded semifinal can take place because of the narrow table in the West, and even a little bit of looking at the narrow table in the region. But in terms of facilities having, multiple dates booked for events. For example, we're joining everybody live today. We're talking about what could happen tomorrow. And one of those things is a Champions League, a CONCACAF Champions League match that's going to be taking place in Lumen Field between Seattle Sounders and Pumas Unam. And it's a big matchup. And it was marked on this calendar, and it was immediately made unavailable for OL Reign to be able to try to host their home field advantage in Lumen Field because it's a facility that they share not only with the Sounders, but also the Seattle Seahawks. So a little bit of a scurry took place in terms of ironing out some logistics. And it's unfortunate because the concept of home field advantage isn't quite what the Reign are going to be having in this semifinal. They're going to be playing it essentially on the road. And there was a temporary plan in place to have this match at Segra Field. And then a third adjustment was made and finally announced that the match will actually be taking place at Audi Field. It was something that we were trying to keep our eyes on so that we can make sure that we had the right information. But now it's OL Reign number 1, but on the road against Washington Spirit. There's some things here that doesn't necessarily feel more glass half full for me. I think there's going to be a little bit more challenges here within this semifinal for a team like the Reign going up against the Spirit. And
it has to, because the number 1 seed that is OL Reign, they really lose all of the advantages of having the number 1 seed. You usually play against what would be assumed to be the weakest team because number 1 goes against number 4 and you have home field advantage. You don't have to travel. There's all these things that come into play, and none of that is a factor, honestly, because OL Reign just played Washington Spirit. The two just played each other last weekend in the regular season. OL Reign, from my understanding, has been on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. since the day before their last match, which is last weekend. That is a lot of time to be living in a hotel and eating food that is provided to you by a team, not being able to go to a grocery store, buy the snacks that you like, and sleep in your own bed and be with your dog and be with your significant others and your roommates that you live with. It's just a whole different atmosphere that now gives Washington the upper hand as they head into this match. But we have to talk about it because they have a field. They're playing at Audi Field, which is a much better field than Segra Field in Leesburg, Virginia. So that's a really big positive. Both of these teams are familiar with Audi as they both just played there a few days ago. And they've played there in the past. So at least the field conditions, the stadium, all of that will be top notch. The game being at 8 o'clock Eastern on CBS Sports Network, that will be really good and really entertaining. But this also allows for the crossover that's happening with an 8 o'clock game, and which should have been a 10 o'clock game is now 8 and 8:30 kickoff times, which makes viewing them a little bit trickier. But we'll do it. We can handle it. We got multiple screens.
Yeah. It's not something that we're unfamiliar with, quite frankly, as we've seen some overlap before in terms of kickoff happening for the regular season in the past, and quite frankly, already to start the 2022 season. But now that we've chatted a little bit about stadium logistics and the concept of what is a home field advantage or lack thereof, let's talk a little bit about the soccer between these two teams and what they could present to each other on this Challenge Cup semifinal. when we're maybe to sort of transition a little bit, perhaps one of the only, if perhaps the only silver lining within all of this was to get this OL side to the East Coast and have them settled in as quickly as possible, because these changes sort of felt like they were happening pretty rapid fire. And then all of a sudden it was confirmed, gonna stay out here in the East Coast to have both your Challenge Cup semifinal and your regular season opener. So we have a match to actually go off of between these two teams in 2022 ahead of this Challenge Cup semifinal. They kicked off their regular season facing each other. And listen, when we recap that match for our show this week, Lisa, we felt it was one of the better matches
Yes.
of the weekend. And I am just excited that we're already going to get a chance to see these two teams go head to head again this soon in 2022. When we saw that these two teams were shook out to be two of the final four in the semifinalists, we were already thinking playoff preview, right? Like there's a potential to see these teams not only go head to head in the regular season, because you got one and you got one away based on how the regular schedule is, but the potential for the table to shake out perhaps similarly as it did in 2021, where these teams face each other down the stretch in a playoff game. So there's a lot here, I think, between these two teams. Even just if we're looking at this recent game that took place on May 1st, a 2-1 win going to Washington Spirit at Audi Field. On top of that, I think if you're OL Reign, you got to be looking at this and be a little fueled by that. There were some moments in this game where they struggled to make the most of their opportunities in the final third. We're talking only 3 attempts on target of their 10 shots total in the match, majority of the possession, but again, just unable to find that breakthrough. Lisa, we saw a missed or a saved penalty from Rose Lavelle, and then we saw her get a goal for OL Reign, but you could see the frustration in getting that goal. It was one of those, maybe not so pretty, but it finally just got into the back of the net, and you could just see the body language was like, oh, like finally
I know.
getting one against this team. So the fact that I think that we have this match to look at ahead of this semifinal, I think just adds to the excitement of what we could see on Wednesday.
It completely does, because both teams already had a chance to face each other, to play, at Audi Field, but against the competition in preparation for this. And it's a quick turnaround from Sunday to Wednesday. And both of these sides are also hopeful to play again on Saturday in the Challenge Cup final. And we have to look a bit at the personnel. When we look back to last weekend's game, which is a great yardstick to measure this Challenge Cup semifinal against, we have to take note that Fallon Tullis-Joyce, goalkeeper for OL Reign, had a tremendous game. 10 saves in this match against the Washington Spirit. She kept OL Reign in this completely. You mentioned the saved penalty kick. OL Reign had Rose Lavelle step up and take it. But we have to look at player personnel a little bit too, because OL Reign didn't start Quinn. Lauren Barnes never even played. Ziara King came on in towards the second half, around the 75th minute.
Yeah.
So these are players that, if I'm looking at the rotation that Laura Harvey put out on Sunday, she sat some of her players that get a lot of experience and are huge impact players in these types of matches. I'm specifically looking at Quinn, Barnes, and King, because these 3 players are so instrumental. I would be shocked if they don't get the start this weekend. We saw Bethany Balser have a really tremendous game for OL Reign in the front line. Jess Fishlock got the start, and then along the back line, it was Huerta and Cook who I imagine we will see again in the semifinal for the Challenge Cup. But a little bit of rotation there and player minute management coming from Laura Harvey on this side. We saw the same thing from Kris Ward and Washington Spirit. No Andi Sullivan. She was not listed on the roster, and she did not play at this time and of this recording of this YouTube live. I don't know Andi Sullivan's status, where she will be in terms of injury and recovery coming back for these semifinals. But Kelly O'Hara didn't start for Washington Spirit. Emily Sonnet didn't start in the back line. So those are some aspects of players that they did come in. Herrera and Emily Sonnet did rotate into the game. They took out Brooks and Goff in the back line for Kris Ward, but player minute management is really huge. And now coming from a Sunday game back to a Wednesday game, I'm interested to see if which side is going to pull out full strength and who's really going to come full force in this match, because I can assure you that we're going to see Sanchez, Rodman, and Hatch.
No.
They're going to be lethal up top for Washington Spirit. I think Bethany Balser has a lot that she wants to prove in this match, get back to a Challenge Cup final, see if OL Reign can bring home that final. And I have a question I want to pose to you, Sandra. I have an answer in my mind, but if there's another penalty kick awarded to OL Reign, does Rose Lavelle take it?
Oh man, that's a great question. I'm going to say yes. Actually, I'm going to say yes. I think that you go into this type of match because of the fact that it is a knockout type of match. You obviously have that game plan going in. I'm sure Laura Harvey and the squad are going to have a list of penalty kick takers in terms of scenarios that might come up during regulation, or should it come down to something like penalty kicks between these two teams. But I think coming out of that regular season match and then having Roosevelt step up and convert that penalty kick and then having it saved, you could see the frustration and maybe perhaps it wasn't the best or well taken penalty. So I think they already have had those conversations. I think they have already had those scenarios in play. We saw it happen in the regular season. So I think, yes, I think she is still the one that you asked to step up.
I agree.
And take this penalty.
I agree. And knowing Rose Lavelle, she's the type of player that is like, I want to take the next one. Nope. Yeah. I want to get it back. I want to try again. She is going to bury it as well if she gets awarded another penalty kick. So we'll see kind of what happens. This is definitely one of the most anticipated games to see, kind of compare and contrast from the regular season match that just happened last weekend to the Challenge Cup semifinal taking place on Wednesday.
Let's maybe chat a little bit of the Spirit side of things. We've been talking a little bit and focusing on the Reign and head coach Laura Harvey and what we think we might see from this OL side. When it comes to the Spirit, though, they are the away team, but they are absolutely going to have a home field advantage here. They've had some success at Audi Field. It is a place where we have seen them play and thrive. And now they're going to get a chance to do this against OL Reign once more, but in a knockout round capacity. I'm looking at this Spirit side, and we saw them perhaps get off to what could be considered a slow start for this team in Challenge Cup, picking up a couple draws, but then ultimately closing out, going undefeated, and then going ahead and earning some wins within there. But more importantly, watching the return of their attack get back to that sort of high octane, incredibly active and dynamic trio in the final third. We were curious with that 0-0 draw that they had to open up their Challenge Cup. We were like, okay, is this something where we're just shaking off a little bit of the preseason here? And sure enough, we saw the transgression from that week one to the final group stage for this Washington Spirit side. And then honestly, we saw it again in the regular season when they kicked things off. Sanchez, Rodman, Hatch. We've talked a little bit about highlighting Anna Hefferty in this as well. Someone who has slotted in and has been able to just sort of make it look seamless for this attack. Not really looking at it. That's a hiccup when you're kind of rotating personnel in and out of this attack for the Spirit, which is important, I think, when you're trying to begin what is essentially a title defense in 2022 as reigning champions of NWSL. And if you have the depth on the bench to sort of show, hey, we're going to make another run, that is incredibly impressive. And we chatted a little bit about Hefferty going from, being utilized initially further back at the fullback position and now being slotted up higher. I mean, this is a player that was among the top 5 and led the players in chances created with 5 in this regular season match for the Washington Spirit against OL Reign. And then obviously seeing a player like Ashley Sanchez just being ridiculous this year, doing a madness out on the pitch. It feels like every other game. I mean, they leave little doubt, Lisa. They leave little doubt that they are the attack in NWSL to look at and say that's a threat. And I
They
think we're
are.
gonna see something again in the semifinal from them at Audi
I
Field.
think we will as well. I mean, when you look at some of the stats out of the Challenge Cup, 12 goals were scored by Washington Spirit. They allowed 7, but when you look at OL Reign and their very lethal attack, 11 goals were scored by OL Reign in that attack. But Washington Spirit, they are just so good. And the scary part is they're getting better every single game. They really are, because they're understanding their opponents a little bit better. They're growing with confidence. I mean, Trinity Rodman, Ashley Sanchez, they look fearless when they are playing soccer. They are driving at defenders. They're taking chances. They're being creative with their opportunities, which you don't see a lot of young players do. I think when we look back to the 2021 season, specifically for Rodman, who ended up being the rookie of the year in the NWSL, she was always good and she was always talented, but it was almost conservative in her play and how she was doing. She knew what worked well and she was going to continue to do that. This season so far, in the 6 games we've seen in the Challenge Cup and the one for the regular season, Trinity Rodman is trying different things. She's not afraid to take on a defender and go end line to send crosses in, or cut inside, or looking to get assists and be really creative in that attack. And it's difficult for opponents to defend against Rodman, Sanchez, and Hatch because their movement up top. We throw in Anna Helferty as well into that mix. They are interchanging with each other. They're dropping back, receiving the ball at their feet, having their teammates run off their shoulder. It's just such a variety of attack that makes it really difficult. This matchup is going to be so impressive and so good to see, because now there's a little bit more on the line. In their regular season match, it was just 3 points in the regular season on the line. This one, there is a trophy on the line. There is money on the line for this one. There's a Challenge Cup final on the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I know in terms of how the scheduling got mapped out this year with some of the overlap between Challenge Cup and now the regular season. There's a little bit of discourse in that. The planning around it, questionable, I think, at best. I think is probably putting it politely. We chatted a little bit about that before too, Lisa, when we were previewing both the Challenge Cup schedule and the regular season schedule. This concept of overlap is not unfamiliar when we're looking at competition globally. There are cup competitions that take place alongside a regular season throughout women's soccer across the world. However, this is the first time in NWSL competition where there is some overlap here. And also there's some different little bit of planning with those cup competitions. They don't typically overlap in a way where you have to potentially reschedule some regular season fixtures. So I think there's obviously some understandable discourse in that as well. So we're gonna have a little bit more clarity, I think, in terms of how the regular season will be impacted based on the results of these semifinals. But in terms of the long march or the long grind of a season and what a team wants to try to accomplish in terms of defining their own success, this is the first one.
Yeah.
It starts with the Challenge Cup. It is the first title that a team can win when they're looking at the calendar year for the Challenge Cup. And it just sort of feels like a little bit perhaps of some foreshadowing, or maybe a little bit of destiny here, that these two teams are getting a crack at each other this early in the year for a spot in the Challenge Cup semifinal. We're going to be keeping an eye on it. Once again, 8 p.m. Eastern on CBS Sports Network. Make sure, everybody, that you all tune in. We have another semifinal to preview for you all. It's going to be Kansas City Current versus North Carolina Courage. We're going to get into that soon. But first, Lisa, before we get into that, I got to ask you, let's get a pick for this game. Who are you picking and why in OL Reign and Washington Spirit?
So Washington just won 2-1 over OL Reign. The missed penalty kick with Rose Lavelle. There's so many different factors that come into this. I think OL Reign is pissed. I
Yeah.
think Laura Harvey is upset with that loss, knows that her team can do better. This decision is incredibly hard. I honestly think it's gonna be a draw and go into penalty kicks, but I think OL
Nice.
Reign is going to win. OL Reign comes out on top. Well, what do you have, Sandra? What are you thinking?
Listen, I love that pick. I love going to penalty kicks.
I know.
Drama when you're neutral, penalty kicks is amazing. When you're invested, it's like the biggest tummy ache in the world. I don't have it going to penalty kicks between these two teams, but I am looking at OO Reign and I'm thinking that they are of the same mentality that you just mentioned, that there's a lot there in that regular season opener between the two of them that they have to go off of. There's a lot of footage there. I'm looking at individual matchups as well in
Mhm.
this one. I can imagine that Sofia Huerta is looking at some of that highlight footage where Trinity Rodman was giving her fits out on the flank. I'm looking at Rose Lavelle and maybe the fact that she, missed out on converting that penalty opportunity. I'm looking at somebody like a Jess Fishlock, who's the
Yeah.
reigning MVP, and how she's going to grab this team by the scruff of the neck and see what they can do against this Spirit side. I like All Reign's chances in this one. But that being said, I'm going to go with Washington Spirit. I just think there's
Ooh.
too much there in the attack. I think that we saw something incredibly special happening in this regular season matchup. I think the back line in Washington Spirit was actually the more underrated star of that regular season match. The attention
Mhm.
always goes on the attack. And you know us, Lisa, we like to talk about
Love
defenders on this
defense.
show. We love a good defense, but I am high on Aubrey Kingsbury. I am high on Sam Staub because this is a defense that can play out of the back and connect with their attack. I'm going with Spirit in this one, but I think it's going to be taken care of in regulation and it's going to be narrow. That's the type of drama we're going to get. So you're going All Rain. I'm going Spirit. We'll see who's correct. We're going to talk about it live for everybody.